My name is Dan Fisk. I'm one of the vice presidents here at the International Republican Institute, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone today to another in our Democratic Governance Speaker Series. Also, we are pleased to be co-hosting this event with the Atlantic Council, and we're joined by Peter Pham, who's the director of the Council's Michael S. Ansari Africa Center. So, Peter, thank you for being with us today. For us here at IRI, democracy is more than elections. What happens between elections, governing, is as equally important as robust political parties and an engaged and informed civil society. As such, democratic governance is a core component of IRI's mission. To date, the Institute has conducted governance programs in more than 20 countries. For us, the term democratic governance, though, has a specific context. It reflects a system in which there is genuine citizen involvement in the planning performed by and the decision-making of governmental institutions, and where those in official positions are responsible and accountable to the citizenry. We initiated this speaker series some time ago with the goal of broadening the discussion on governance in Washington. There's a lot of discussions on other issues, human rights and others, but we thought opportunities to discuss the issues of governance were equally important. Previously, we've hosted discussions on governance in Mexico, Kenya, and Jordan, and in the coming months, we plan to hold a session on governance in Ukraine. Today, we are focusing on Rwanda, a country that has been rebuilding since the tragic events of 1994. And while that country faces a number of challenges, it has taken some noteworthy steps, including the creation of the Rwanda Governance Board, whose mission is to promote the principles of good governance, including the delivery of services and decentralization. I'm pleased to turn the program over to Paul Fagan, who's IRI's director of the Africa Division. He will moderate the program and introduce our speakers. And again, it's my pleasure to welcome you all. So thanks for joining us. Paul, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Well, first of all, thank you for turning out today. I think we're excited to talk about what's happening in Rwanda. Obviously, I know there's a lot of interest right now as there's the International Conference on the Great Lakes region being held in Uganda today. But today we want to talk about what's happening internally in Rwanda and talk about the governance and the progress that's been made there. I first want to welcome Professor Anastase Shyaka from Rwanda. He's the current Chief Executive Officer of the Rwanda Governance Board. He has quite a bit of experience in this area. He has a PhD in political science. He's the former director of the Center for Conflict Management at the National University of Rwanda. He's the founder of 2 journals, and he was here on a Fulbright, I believe, recently at Nova, for all of us who are familiar with that, and also George Mason. And also, we want to thank Dr. Peter Pham, joining us from the Atlantic Council. Just a word about Peter. I think he's really given the Atlantic Council, he's brought a lot of great experience to the Atlantic Council and really put it on the map of leading discussions on what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. And if anyone subscribes to Peter's listserv, you know he's a very prolific writer and pretty much knows everything on Africa. And I can honestly say he knows everything on Africa, and there isn't really much he doesn't know. He, as Dan said, he is the director of the Michael S. Ansari Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. He was previously professor at James Madison University, and he's been a long-time supporter of IRI's work, and we're very appreciative of all the things that Peter has done for us in Liberia and Nigeria, especially in Somaliland, and many other places. So we really appreciate both of you coming out and presenting today. Just a little bit about IRI and our governance efforts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. As Dan talked a little bit about what we're doing, IRI, as many of you know, has built its reputation around elections, around political party development, around civil society engagement. And we're not leaving that behind by any means, but we're also focusing on this area of democratic governance, and where we've had a lot of experiences working in Kenya most recently. Where we're getting more involved in Rwanda is through an Africa Regional Governance Program. It's more of a study on best practices in sub-Saharan Africa, and Rwanda is going to be one of the case studies. But this is not new to IRI. Back in the mid to late 90s, we did extensive local governance work in South Africa, primarily in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and we also had done quite a bit of work in Mali recently. In the mid-2000s, before obviously things went wrong there recently. But today we want to focus on Rwanda, and we're very appreciative to the professor and also to the Embassy of Rwanda reaching out to us to put this on the docket, and for leaders in Washington, political or think tank leaders and others, to discuss what's happening there, and to talk about this model, this good governance model in Rwanda. And is it a model? And if so, why? The professor will talk about, the Rwanda Governance Board and what it handles, but also where Rwanda is today versus where it was more than a decade ago. Peter will also offer his remarks, a rebuttal on all of this. And this is, a discussion about Rwanda. I know there are a lot of issues going on with relating to Rwanda in the Great Lakes region. And the professor can choose to answer some of those questions or not, but I don't know if that's necessarily in his purview. So I leave it at that, and thank you again, Professor, and I let you talk about Rwanda. Yeah, just. What do you prefer?
Vice President Paul and Dr. Peter, distinguished audience, warm greetings from the heart of Africa. Good morning. It's not winter, and I feel as if it was. So I'm pleased to be around, and I thank you very much for the invitation extended to me through the embassy to come around and to share with you our thoughts about Rwanda's approaches to governance, and also to share with others their knowledge and expertise. And as Peter has said, from the Rwanda Governance Board, which is rather a new institution, charged with the responsibility of being a driver or at the center of the good governance, we are considering as a foundation for development. So while I think we'll agree Rwanda has become in the narrative out of the country a center of controversies, some saying things are not working there, others saying this is the best case we can have, saying that probably it is an inspiration for other African developing countries, but also that version being also contexted by other narratives based on a number of arguments, which I want to enter to. But what I wanted to start with is after the 1994 genocide, I think Rwanda has learned a lot of lessons based on our own context, our own mistakes, and we tried to reinvent our lives and our future based on what we considered as our mistakes and what we considered as our lessons and what we considered as workable, actionable strategies for national reconstruction. So that's why, in that spirit, we also engineered a kind of working democratic model in our context, which by and large might not be satisfactory for many of the observers might consider, disagree with it, or criticize it. But from the perspective of Rwanda, for which that model has been conceived, that's what we found to be working, that's what we accepted, and that's what the people of Rwanda has approved in our constitution in 2003. The foundation of the Rwanda's governance model is a gradual one. So it is not something that is fixed there, that is copied from elsewhere. Of course, we are open to learn lessons and to improve our own systems and thinking around a number of issues. But definitely the priority is about the context. What is working in Belgium or in the UK, in the US, might not necessarily be working in the context of Rwanda, and vice versa. What is working in Rwanda might not work in Dar es Salaam or in Kenya or elsewhere. So what I want to share with you today is about my institution, but also a number of 2-3 key issues. I want to discuss with you about the democratic model, democratic governance or model of democracy of Rwanda. I want also to look into a number of reforms beyond the current discourses around Rwanda vis-a-vis the region, but also, and of course, looking at what we have as drivers or what characterizes today's Rwanda's governance system. But first and foremost, the Rwanda Governance Board, as Paul has briefly introduced, is a new institution which is said to be a one-stop center for governance issues, starting from decentralization, from local government capacity building, from promotion of best practices of principles of governance, including political governance, but also conducting policy research in the governance field, and mainly looking at monitoring, kind of auditing, cross-section of institutions on how governance practices are being aligned with the principles of governance as we know them. So it is in this regard that a number of studies to inform policies are conducted. They include what we call the Rwanda Governance Scorecard, which is a kind of index or barometer of where different along the big indicators of governance, from political rights, civil liberties, to rule of law and service delivery, anti-corruption, all those indicators are ranked across institutions to make sure that we identify where we have weaknesses and we identify where we have strength, so that on a yearly basis we can measure how progress is. We do have also something called Citizen Report Card, which is a mechanism to help capture the people's citizens' feedback on policies, so that we can also inject beyond that scientific analysis of public policies, but it's important also to associate people to see what they see as good and what they see as weak, so that also we can build on it. That is the meaning of democracy in our thinking. But also the Rwanda Governance Board is dealing with media, is now the institution that is charged with the coordination of media policy in the country, including we are in a phase of huge media reforms, so that coordination of that, the media reforms and media policies entrusted in the Rwanda Governance Board. I will have some 2-3 minutes to share with you the major reforms we are undergoing. That institution also is charged with the responsibility of registration of political parties, as well as registration, legal personality, and management of civil society organizations, as well as faith-based organizations. When it comes to democratic model of Rwanda, as you well know, by and large, the term democracy and democratic approaches in the African context, at least in my country, started back slightly before we gained independence in the late 50s. So up to 1994, Rwanda has got 2 period of intense democratic or political search for democracy. One was from 59 to 62. Another one was from 90 to 94. And both those centers in time have been intense, not only in terms of political competition, but also in terms of violence and social disintegration. Simply because one of the reasons being that the model people advocated of democracy, either democracy was not understood by the local actors, or the model of democracy they intended to go into was totally not appropriate for the context. So that's why after 1994, it was very clear that while we knew that democratic processes or failed democratic processes have been part and parcel of the conflicts and have catalyzed identity conflicts, we also knew that we can't move forward if we forget about democracy and if we forget about political parties. That's why trying to resolve the problems of model of democracy, which model will work and which one is not working, that's where the element of consensus and inclusiveness came. And when you look at the Rwandan model from that perspective and from the political science perspective, you understand that what the Rwandese called inclusiveness and consensus is directly related to what is well known as consensual democracy. Although the Switzerland model, Belgium, Netherlands, or New Zealand model of consensus is different from the Rwandese one, but you see there are some correlation, at least in terms of saying none of the winning political party or ruling political party can't have so-and-so majority in the government. So in the context of Rwanda, the consensual model of democracy means there are 3-4 critical elements. One is that we consider that identity does not have and can't be a core center of democratic or political development. So rather, the centrality of democracy is about people, citizen participation, but identity is not the major element of it. Second is that while it's important to think about identities and other aspects, it is also important to think about categories of the society, especially women. So that's when people thought that whatever democratic we might be, if we don't include women in our political thinking, we'll probably be excluding half of the society. That's why now we have emerged as number one in terms of women representation in the parliament. Second, in terms of political identities, regardless of what type of majority a ruling party wins, it is regulated by the Constitution. The ruling party can't have over 50% of members of that party in the government, regardless of what majority you have. Second, regardless of the majority of the winning party in parliamentary elections, the president of the Congress of the parliament can't be from the very same political party as the president, simply because the head of the legislature and the head of the executive, if they are from the very same political option, then that inclusiveness loses its meaning. There are a number of such mechanisms that the Rwanda's model of democracy provides, but it is definitely by opposition of the majoritarian. Rwanda's approach says the winner does not take it all. So regardless of how you win, you have to share with other political options. The third issue I wanted to speak about is about media reform. As I said, Rwanda Governance Board is pleased to be in charge of that responsibility. And I wanted to say the media reform currently in the parliament in Rwanda have 4 critical pillars. One is that, and I'm happy that bill actually was initiated by my office like last year, about the Access to Information Bill. Access to Information Bill is probably one of the very few bills or laws in Rwanda that will have been initiated out of the legislature and out of the executive. It has been initiated totally out of those two centers, and we advocated for it to have the cabinet approving it and to have the parliament having it and passing it. And now it is at the latest stage, and that is one of the very few, because we understood that Access to Information Bill is going to serve as a catalyst for good governance for citizens, not only media, but for citizens accessing information, and it will become each official public servant will have the obligation to provide to the public each and every public information, not classified one, but public information. So we think that we not only have a tremendous impact on the governance structures internally, accountability systems, but also it's a best practice because as of today, only 6 African nations has such a mechanism. And we believe by the end of this year, that bill will be out. The second media reform important trend is the transformation of the currently Orenfo is a state media, into a public media. For those conversant with the media thing, from the state to public broadcaster, there is a huge and tremendous difference. The third one is, of course, the review of the media law as we had it, but the critical elements of that media law transformation is that we are initiating a self-regulation policy. That is saying, yes, we have been having a lot of critiques, we have been having challenges within ourselves, the government trying to regulate the media sector, and people say, of course, self-regulation is different from no regulation, but we are saying maybe the media practitioners are now mature enough to take the responsibility of self-regulating themselves. So now the major trend, and we hope by the next year also we'll have it in place and functional, is that we want the government to get out of the regulation of media sector, but media sector to set up a self-regulation body so that colleagues can regulate colleagues, can correct colleagues, and we also hope and think that not only it will catalyze the growth of the sector, but also it will have a huge impact on how media, again, come in and contribute to the watchdogs function and also grow in terms of the capacity, and etc. So that means very soon the media regulation, the government into the media thing will be completely off. It will be left to media practitioners, and we have also the responsibility, of course, we will be left with the responsibility of helping and advocating for that self-regulation body to be able to deliver the task. So lastly, I can't finish without looking into a number of special programs, one of them being what we call the joint governance assessment. So as I said before, so maybe Rwanda is not necessarily a paradise or perfect landscape in terms of governance, but Rwanda has shown a strong commitment to improving its own governance systems. Rwanda has shown a strong commitment and consistent commitment towards linking governance to development, linking the structures of the government to socio-economic transformation. So governance for us is a mechanism, is that way institutions, frameworks can contribute in a consistent way towards socio-economic transformation, towards guaranteeing more domestic accountability, toward fostering peace and stability, towards creating more conducive environment for doing business. So in this regard, we've got 3 mechanisms that helps to consolidate that good governance. One deals with international partners, and the second one deals with national stakeholders. The third one is directed towards local communities. The one directed toward local communities is called Mobile School of Governance, which is a framework we use, especially Rwanda Governance Board. We use to make sure that at local level, citizens participate in their daily business. They can participate in the planning and monitoring of their local authorities, and they also can participate to make sure they foster accountability at that level. The second is the issue of non-state actors participating and bringing inputs into policy frameworks. And that one is done basically through policy dialogues on various issues. The media reform I was giving just now has had, those reforms have had a lot of inputs from non-state actors. But the third one, which is probably most interesting, is that Rwanda, as of today, is the only one country to have a mechanism, a joint governance assessment. What this means, it means that it is a novelty between Rwanda and development partners, including the US, the DFID, UK, France, all big DPs in Kigali, are part and parcel of that mechanism, and it consists of permanent dialogue and assessments. Dialogue around governance issues. Now we have got, this is the second publication, this joint governance assessment. It assessed Rwanda, it has just come out, and it assessed Rwanda on a number, about 14 indicators of governance for 2 years, 2008 and 2009. And the intention was to make sure that the government, both the government, specifically the ministers in charge of governance issues, and their counterparts in the development community, look at a number of those indicators and how the government performs, identify the weaknesses, and also strategies how to improve. So it is a huge and very challenging process. This process also is being housed under the Rwanda Governance Board as a secretariat of the whole staff. And the beauty of it is that people agree to disagree and move in agreement, well, even when they don't agree on each and everything, but they agree to continue and to talk and to identify areas where weaknesses are and to see where improvement has made, and to identify strategies on how to move forward. So we are very pleased to have this. The very same mechanism has been initiated in a number of African countries, but it was very difficult to sustain it, so it wasn't concluded. So I was just saying that maybe we, as a country, we can't say it's a perfect land in terms of governance. We still have some challenges, but definitely we dare to confront them, and we are open for new proposals and for sure to work together with various stakeholders so that we can improve where weaknesses are found, and we are ready also to have some best practices and lessons from left and right, as long as they are aligned and they are not copied into our context, but they inform our own understanding so that we can elaborate our own system that can work in our context. So without undue delay, I'm very sure that the best thing is to talk less and to open the floor so that we can have comments, because I'm talking what I think is important, but probably people, the audience, know what they think is most important. They have a number of questions. So I just talked briefly about a number of issues I wanted to share, but I'm open for questions and comments, and ready to maybe to take back home some of your insights to make sure that our public policing also can benefit from such dialogue around here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. And before we open it up to the floor, we definitely want to hear from Peter as well, and then we will open it up to questions after Peter.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks, Dan, for the introduction earlier. It's always a pleasure to be back over here at IRI. It's a privilege to follow Professor Shyaka's comments and his overview of Rwanda's governance structure. And what I'd like to do is just make some comments on one aspect of it, tease a few things out, and then, as the professor said, really open it up for dialogue and questions. One of the professor's comments was that one of the objectives of this governance architecture they laid out was to link governance to socio and economic transformation. And I think that's an important point because I think one of the great takeaways from Rwanda's experience has been its development model. And what I'd like to do is just present a few reflections on that development model, how it relates to democracy, human rights, and what lessons we might draw from that, especially in this period of considerable political transformation that's sweeping North Africa, the Middle East, as well as sub-Saharan Africa. One of the points that I think is often forgotten when we talk about the so-called Arab Spring is that it's more than just about people seeking to have a say in the future of the state. They certainly desire that, but they also desire prosperity. They also desire economic security. One Egyptian friend of mine made a comment in the middle of, a year ago, in the middle of the protests in Tahrir Square, that we want our children to choose leaders and to have the freedom to speak out about those leaders, but we also want them to be educated and to be able to have families which they can support. And I think that, to me, was always an insight into what really was at stake in the Arab Spring. And, of course, in the academic literature, which Professor knows well, and the background academia, there's a lot of ink has been spilled, a lot of trees cut down to publish all sorts of things about the relationship between liberal democratic systems and economic advancement. And, of course, the great thesis is that a middle class will want a say in political governance, and so economic prosperity is a pathway to democracy. And this all leads to why I think Rwanda's case is particularly relevant. Here's a country that has seen extraordinary growth in a country with no discernible geographical advantages. In fact, one could argue you have quite a number of geographical disadvantages. And then also less than 2 decades from one of the greatest atrocities we've seen in not just the 20th century, but really human history. You have a country that has invested in development of infrastructure, health, and education, developed itself as a niche for as a regional telecom hub. In fact, you've turned what was a very sad, tragic chapter of history into actually a selling point, which is, come and invest with us, be a part of our renaissance. So in a way, be part of that good story, which might be an interesting lesson to, one can imagine, or at least hope for the day when, that might be the same slogan for a place like Egypt, be part of our recovery, come back to the tourist sites, everything else, and be part of the positive story. And part of this development positive story, I think, has been the Vision 2020 plan, which Rwanda has. It's a plan that was supposed to take the country, begin articulate around the turn of the century, 2000, and supposed to come to fulfillment in 2020, to take one of the least developed countries in the world, country where 2/3 of the population lived in poverty a decade ago, and despite the estimate that the population will probably double in that period, to take that least developed country with 2/3 poverty rate into the middle income brackets. It's an extraordinarily ambitious goal, especially when you look at the constraints. And let me just cite some of those constraints because I think it puts it all into context. In 2000, 90% of the Rwandan workforce was involved in agriculture. Plus, you had the high birth rate adding to that, and the lack of arable land in Rwanda. If you've been there, it's a mountainous terrain. It's the land of the Thousand Hills. But when you have Thousand Hills, you have a question of arable land. We're not, all of which threaten subsistence. If you look at the hard number rather than point away for. Debt was at that point, I think the best statistic I found is 115%, you may know better, of GDP, which if you had that today would put you squarely in the middle of our European pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. The lack of human capital was another constraint. And quite frankly, an entire generation of teachers, professionals, the people who would drive normal economic development, was wiped out in the genocide. And yet, they put forward this plan, which had 3 phases. The first was to promote macroeconomic stability and thus attract investment. The second one was to transform the rather unsustainable agrarian situation that I mentioned earlier into a knowledge-based economy. And then a third phase to take those two, the macroeconomic stability and the knowledge-based economy, and create a middle class of entrepreneurs who would drive the country into the middle income stages. This plan had 6 pillars the first was to cover is, I think, the one the professor has emphasized the most, which is the first step, the fostering of good governance and creating a capable state. And I think that's one that includes instilling the rule of law and creating a small but responsive government, as he mentioned. Second one was to develop the human resources and to transition to the knowledge economy. And I might point out that actually this month, I believe, Carnegie Mellon University's program in Rwanda is opening up, which is going to be the first American degree granting institution in sub-Saharan Africa that grants a U.S. degree in IT. It's going to open in Kigali, is opening this month, or may have already opened. Third one was a comprehensive privatization program. Fourth pillar was building out the infrastructure. Fifth was, obviously, if the population is doubling, need to increase the agricultural production of the country. And finally, and I think a very important one, is this is not totally focused internally, but regional and international integration being a key to this. If you're a landlocked country in the warm heart of Africa, you need to have that integration otherwise. And with these 6 pillars, the program laid out kind of 3 kind of cross-cutting sectors. One was gender equality, the professor has mentioned, and Rwanda does have the unique system which mandates, as part of the representation, allocation of seats to women in parliament, on the maintenance of the environment, natural resources, and of course the building of science and technology. And so the question is this model sustainable, and can it be exported? And here, I think, is the question that we really need, and the data is coming in. I don't think we can reach conclusively, but there are 3 elements to getting all this done. It's a very ambitious agenda, one that one applauds. One is obviously fighting corruption and transparency, and I think Rwanda should be credited for the fighting corruption and the transparency which the development partners can track their money quite literally on the internet. The second element is the top-down collaboration within society. Now, where the data is beginning to come in, I think the jury is still, I would say in all fairness, the jury is still entirely out on how that model is working, but certainly it's a different approach. And the third one is the one that I think causes me a bit of concern, in all frankness, is that a lot of this has been driven on relationships built by the extraordinary historical figure of Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. He's a remarkable spokesman for this program and other plans. And quite frankly, I'm not sure there's a you can institutionalize him, so to speak, in the positive sense. And I think that's going to be a question that, especially as the Constitution of 2003, I believe, limits the current term is the president's last term. And that's a question, I throw that as a question mark simply, is this model which requires not only all these parts and all this participation, but a spokesman to put a face to it and to sell it to the international community, is that can the tripod stand without one of those legs, or is there another one on reserve? That I throw that out as speculative. There are, however, 2 other concerns I would have, and this leads to the one is all this model that has been laid out has a lot of things going. It emphasizes obviously the development aspects, the government aspects. The question, of course, is the political space in Rwanda, the political space and how that plays out. if I can venture, and at this point it only is a bit of speculation, I think in the long term it can work out. In the long term, if you develop, if all the development plans follow the objectives, if you develop a middle-income society, you will have a more stable country, and with stability comes the removal of the justification that a strong state is needed to keep the chaos at bay. You have a stable state, you don't need as heavy of a security apparatus, et cetera. So I think in the long term, you will have people demanding, as democratic theory holds a greater role. So in the long term, I think there's in the short term, I think that's a question that I think could be very put, and I would appreciate Professor Shyaka's comments on, although the system has provision for inclusion of various groups and sectors, are we more than simply participants in by our identification with professional groups, social groups, whatever have you? Is there more to it, and is there sufficient space for the individual within the system? And with that, I'll stop, and I think we move to the more fruitful aspect of this dialogue.
Peter, thank you very much for that very comprehensive overview of your thoughts on Rwanda. And as I indicated in the beginning, I think Peter knows everything. If you asked him to do this on Liberia tomorrow, he could probably give you the same presentation and all about Liberia or Burundi or Kenya. So thank you so much, Peter. But I would like to open it up to questions. We do have microphones, so if you could just obviously introduce yourself. If you're with an organization, do that as well. And please, try to keep it to questions and limit your comments only because we'd like to get to as many questions as possible. So we can.
Marjorie Scott, Washington, D.C. Rotary. What was your second after political space?
It was the question I alluded previously of the personalization and whether. I'm sorry. It was personalization and whether this model, although it does build an institutional framework, it doesn't. Does that framework work absent certain key actors, et cetera?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tyler Suk, and I had a question regarding, freedom of press. So, the government is getting out of the regulations, and we've seen some, sentence reductions with some journalists, and that's great. But how do you respond to critiques, say, that while the media self-regulation model, could be really open to corruption and still a lot of government interference, and so while you're moving away from official legislative, you still have a lot of, it's still open to a lot of journalists intimidation after 2 decades of, imprisonment, exile, and assassination of journalists. So essentially, how do you respond to those critiques, and do you see a true freedom of press sometime in the near future, or is that kind of out of the question at this point?
Thank you very much for the question. But as far as I know it's another conflicting narrative when it comes to freedom of expression and freedom of media in Rwanda. So one thing that people do not talk about is that on one hand, we talk about media that has participated has catalyzed, if I can say, the commission of genocide. But we forget to say that actual media practitioners has been completely disseminated by the genocide too. So which means those who are used to Rwanda prior to 1994 genocide, the media sector was very vibrant in the country. But unfortunately, that vibrancy happened to very much enter into the genocide, which culminated in not only having media of genocide, but also having the sector completely disseminated. So we've left with two problems. One is that the mistrust of people vis-a-vis the media, but also a sector which is extremely weak in terms of capacity. And as of today, we do agree on one thing and disagree on another when it comes to Rwanda vis-a-vis the external world. One is that we do agree that the sector is weak. But even from the internal assessment of the media practitioners themselves, if you ask them why the sector is weak, while people from outside tend to say because the political space is so tightly controlled by the political establishment, the media practitioners, they say we are weak because we don't have capacity, we are weak because the sector does not have enough resources to attract people with enough capacities, which creates a kind of deficit we all observe. So that's something we are trying to work on. When it comes to the imprisonment, killings of journalists, so I think we are referring to Rugambaye, or how was he called?
Oh,
the one you are saying, the killing of journalists, because...
yeah, well, I know there's one assassination in Kenya.
In Kenya?
Yeah.
No, that one I'm... yeah. No, I think at some point, I know there have been an assassination, so it's a bit embarrassing. But there was a journalist who was assassinated 2 years ago in Kigali, but the killer has been arrested. He has been... The justice sector has taken his case, and he has found he was guilty. Actually, he acknowledged, I killed that person because I think he killed my relatives during the genocide. So that was the reason that journalist was killed. But he was killed by another person, but the state instrument, whatever organs, have taken that one, and I don't know, we no longer have the death penalty to shoot him. What the government can do is just to put him in prison and to put him before the justice, whatever. And frankly speaking, he has found guilty, has accepted he did it. So that one for me, I don't know why it keeps coming as if it was an issue. But it was resolved. It doesn't have nothing to do with the practice of that person as being a journalist. That's number one. Number two, we are having the legacy of our past in terms of media and in terms of... so if you look at the sector, if really people want to... Our media sector, we have like 200 journalists. 75% of them do not have any degree at all. 75%. Now, if you take such an important section of stakeholders and you put into consideration that that sector does not have capacity at all, then you understand why the style and the type of media we do have is what we have. So, and when you look at some of those media practitioners with capacity and the way, why do we have to go far? Rwanda has the media sector is so open to such an extent that as of today, Kenyans and Ugandans are coming to do journalism in Rwanda. But they are coming with money and they are coming with skills. But you could see, you can put on balance and see the Rwandese ones and the Kenya ones and the Ugandans ones in terms of being critical vis-a-vis the government, in terms of generating policy inputs to what is happening. You find a huge of difference. And none of those qualified coming from the region has been arrested. So the problem we are having, both of us, we agree that the media sector is weak. But I think where the misinformation is coming is that the external narrative tends to say it is weak because of political actors who do not want the media to speak out. But we are saying it is weak because the actors are weak. They don't have capacity, both financial and human-wise, to contribute to policy formulation and to criticize policies. So in the Rwanda Governance Scorecard I talked about, which is a framework we use to assess, we asked the media to assess themselves. How far do you think we are contributing, we are influencing policy? Media practitioners, they scored themselves 20%. That's how they assess their role in catalyzing public debates, policy thinking. Civil society, national ones, they score themselves 30%. Self-assessment. And when we when we asked, how do you see state civil society relations, non-state whatever, state and non-state actors relations, 89%, saying that in terms of political environment, they don't see any problem. But the problem is when it comes to them creating programs or having capacity to understand, to propose alternative programmatic approaches to what is happening, they find a challenge for 2 reasons: human capacity, but also money. So, and that's why I'm taking long, but I think it's very important we clear that one. When we found out that one, that themselves they are saying they are weak, in my former office at Rwanda Governance Board, we tried to put up a program we called Civil Society Empowerment Program to test and see if we provide some little money to those non-state actors for them to be critical to the government or to analyze some specific policies, what will happen. So the outcome we got was impressive, because you could see now, since they have that little money. I remember one from the media, a private radio called Isango Star in Kigali. They made a proposal of monitoring local government and how they provide services to the people. And they could go to district officers, monitor how citizens are coming to ask for IDs and this and that, or land issues, and report live. And you could see the difficulties of local government in trying to satisfy local citizens' needs. But immediately after 2 months, you could see the difference, because now the local authorities have started fearing the media, because the media was reporting their behavior and their gaps in dealing with the people. So to cut the long story short, there is that huge image and whatever created that journalists in Rwanda are being imprisoned, are being killed, but that's not the case. And whenever it happens, if it happens in Rwanda, if it happens in Kenya, that's something else, and that Kenya or Uganda has to be taken accountable to that. But if it happens in Rwanda, we can't fail to get who did it, and that who did it has to account for it. But unfortunately, we no longer have the death penalty. Even if you have killed somebody and you are taken to justice, you are not going to be killed too, because we don't have the death penalty.
Hi, Alexis Arief with the Congressional Research Service. I wondered, since you mentioned the dialogue between the Rwandan government and donors and partners over democracy and governance and development, if you could talk a little bit about Rwanda's Millennium Challenge threshold grant that was approved by the U.S. government a few years ago, that focused on civil society and some of these governance, political space issues that you've touched on. And if you could talk about some of the successes of that program, some of the challenges, whether it's still being implemented, and whether Rwanda is interested in sort of addressing some of the political and civil liberties issues that have been pointed to as an impediment in receiving a full MCC compact in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The MCC, that's another good program we had with the USA. It was funded. It was a threshold program. It had 5 sub-components. I was lucky because at some point I was the kind of national coordinator of that program on behalf of the government. So the 5 programs we had, I think we had one on justice. We had one on media empowerment, we had civil society empowerment, we had participation, and we had one to support the drafting unit in the parliament. Now, 4 out of 5 completed their life, what they were supposed to do. From my perspective, the program was going well. But at some point, it was assessed that probably our counterparts thought it was important, it was necessary for them to stop it. So the MCC has been stopped, and unfortunately, but it has been stopped when 4 out of 5 programs have ended. The media was ended. The justice one was concluded. So there was one left, which was which intended to enhance citizen participation. It was a 3-year. Actually, it was a 3-year program. It started a little bit late, so it was stopped when they still had 1 year to go. That was the only one stopped. But otherwise, other 3, from our perspective, we are happy with the progress. We are seeing some changes. I have worked with the MCC on a number of issues. We have worked together on a number of policy dialogue. We have, I think, even one of the media law reform. We worked with the MCC to have that policy dialogue to generate some idea and inputs to the government. So we were, and twice, you might be aware than I do, 2 times Rwanda was a candidate for the compact program. It didn't go through. On our side, if someone is assessing and is saying that fine, it's okay, all is okay, but all the requirements they were set by the MCC, you could see that Rwanda would go through, but then they could come up with some other requirements, what they called, I think, democratic indicators are not sufficiently satisfied, and then, but we are fine. I think we have a lot of programs and a number of initiatives we share with America, USAID, and which are going very well. Whether you go into health sector, whether you go into other sectors, agriculture, the partnership we are having from the US is absolutely satisfactory to our side. So whether with MCC or without, I don't think there is a big harm as long as we appreciate the partnership from the America. But unfortunately, the compact, we expected to have the compact. It didn't go through, and we hope that MCC, in its sole sovereignty, will probably rethink and reconsider, because there's something that Peter said, which I would come up. One of the MCC's critical indicator that has to be absolutely satisfied was the anti-corruption stand. And Rwanda, if on anti-corruption, the Vision 2020 we are referring to, Rwanda aspires to be a corruption-free society by 2020. So if you look at the progress we have had in the last 10 years and you compare globally, there is no second. We are second to none in terms of improving our anti-corruption, because we have moved from 30% of score to we are now at 72% globally. So we are ahead of every nation in terms of how can I call it, anti-corruption implementation of anti-corruption policies, if I can put that way. Because in terms of progress, Rwanda is number 1, just as we have become now in doing business in the last few years. So that anti-corruption, I think, it was also very critical to MCC, and that was the strongest point of Rwanda. But otherwise, we have had, I think civil society has been, with MCC, we were actually catalyzing a new beginning of civil society, informed civil society, which is the one we are lacking. The same as for the media. MCC was trying to help the media develop content which is competitive, which is substance-based, but they have gone before we reach a strong point where we can say, here we go. We have a developed sector. So we do hope that what the little we have gained with MCC, we can continue through other means to consolidate them.
Okay. I think we have a question here first, and then we'll have Jim.
Thank you very much. My name is James Nakibonye. I'm the ambassador of Rwanda, Washington, D.C. I think based on the presentation that Professor Shyaka gave us and the comments from Dr. Peter, I think Dr. Peter is in total agreement with what you are saying, and in terms of addressing the achievements based on the policies that were adopted under Vision 2020. But in the end, he raises very critical questions that we should respond to be able to understand where Rwanda is heading and whether we are going to sustain the current achievements. And one of the questions, the two questions he raised, one was personalization, what he calls personalization, that everything that has been successful in Rwanda is built around an individual of the President of Rwanda, President Paul Kagame, and two, whether there's the advancement in terms of economic transformation is going to be the only tool to make Rwanda stable, or if political space is going to be a key factor in the whole process, and whether the combination of the two are going to be vital in terms of making Rwanda a stable state and continue to prosper. My comment on this is that any successful country or state requires a very effective and visionary and a committed, dedicated leader. In the absence of that, I don't think that there's going to be any miracle whereby you're going to have a country that has succeeded without having visionary leadership, including the United States itself, if you look at your history. If you take an example of where Rwanda was in 1994 as compared to Somalia, they were almost at the same level. Both countries were considered to be failed states. So what is that happened in Rwanda that makes Rwanda to be what it is today and what Somalia is today? It is absolutely about the leadership. But being a visionary leader and dedicated leader is not enough. You have to understand that whatever you're doing for your country has to be sustained. And you can't sustain what you are doing by building everything around yourself, but rather build institutions to make sure that the institutions are going to carry forward your vision. And most importantly, create the sense of ownership by the people of that particular country. And this is what has been happening in Rwanda for the last 18 years. Building institutions, social institutions, economic institutions, security institutions. If you look at what Professor Shyaka is heading, it's meant to sustain all these policies that has made Rwanda to be what it is today and to be much more better in the future. If you look at what Rwanda Government Board is doing in terms of creating a very positive environment for business, it's meant to maintain that trajectory to make sure that Rwanda becomes a better place to do business. And I don't think, even though President Kagame was instrumental in terms of creating those institutions under his leadership, those institutions are not built around the president as a person. They are built for Rwanda. I believe if the president finishes his term and there's another president, I don't think anybody who is, I talked about the sense of ownership, who has owned this process all along will accept the fact that Rwanda Development Board is going to be dismantled when it is the institution that has created this positive business environment that has attracted a lot of investments from outside and within the region. So that's very, very key. So building institutions, as you look at Vision 2020 and the milestones in terms of implementation, we have actually recently raised the bar in terms of creating new targets to make sure that we fast track the process. The question of political space, again, this should be discussed in the context of a particular country. The political scientists have argued in many different publications and presentations about the fact that if we are talking about any political process in a particular country or state, we have to discuss that in the context of the historical background of that country, traditions, ethics, and values of that particular society. Looking at the US as a model of democracy in the world, after I was born in early 60s, people resolved their disputes by killing the leadership. We have had cases of assassinations in this country and around the world. But look at where you are today. I don't think people are willing to resolve any political dispute. I have followed the debates on television, heated debates, but in the end, they remain the debates, and they don't escalate into something very terrible for the society. And that's what everybody aspires to be at. And I think having that in mind, you should understand the political building a very strong political system is a process, and you have to measure the milestones. I think Professor Shyaka presented where we were in '94, and the fact that we enacted the constitution that provided for inclusiveness, and even in the preamble, it is very clear that this is going to be a political system that is going to be inclusive, including women, including the handicapped, including different political organizations, and so on. And that has helped us to build a very consensual kind of political process, which has actually helped us to be where we are today. Looking at where the political parties were, they preached hate. We are now talking about political parties working together to build the society. So I think it's a process and should be understood as such, but to be able, as he presented, to measure the milestones every year. Where are we on this particular aspect? In fact, as someone raised the issue of MCC, this is the debate we've had. How do we interpret Rwanda's political system in the context of its history and what we want to be? How have we defined ourselves? If we have defined Rwandans to be Rwandans instead of being Hutus and Tutsis, how does it become a problem of not allowing for political space and freedom of expression? The reason why we decided to be called Rwandans is understood from our historical context, because politics of identity are the ones that created the problems that we had in 1994, even before. So I think it's very important to understand those dynamics even before we reach conclusions, as we have seen from some media organizations and non-state actors that accuse Rwanda for not creating political space necessary for the political system to grow into what people would want to see. By the way, what people would want to see is what Rwandans would want to see at a particular period of time, depending on what they want to achieve and want to be in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those comments. I definitely want to get to some more questions, and I know we have a question back here, and then we'll come to you next.
Hi, Pablo Solora from the U.S. African Development Foundation. Just a quick question to Dr. Pham. Based on your historical analysis of not only the country, region, and the continent, besides the factors that you brought up, what other external and internal factors do you see derailing this process, this ongoing process of improving governance in the country and development for the country?
Thank you, Pablo, for the question. You asked for external factors. I think an important one to bear in mind is the regional security situation. Rwanda, fate has placed Rwanda in the heart of Africa, but that makes it a landlocked state, and it's surrounded by the neighbors it has. Certainly, the situation in the rather ironically named Democratic Republic of Congo. I always wonder about that name when they've never yet finished a complete set in 50 years of presidential, legislative, provincial, and local elections, why it's a Democratic Republic. But the instability there certainly is a threat to Rwanda. From a security point of view, and here I'm speaking purely for myself, if I were running Rwanda, I'm not saying this is what the leadership run, I would be rather concerned. I would consider it all right. We would not put up in America if the situation on our southern border or our northern border was the situation that the DRC so-called government in Kinshasa permits to occur. That people who carried out mass atrocities find shelter there, that all sorts of very strange and questionable actors have run right up to our borders. I think it's a situation that I think most states it's challenging. So I think that is certainly one thing. As the DRC goes, I think Rwanda goes. If you look at the neighbors, Tanzania is relatively good, but Burundi is still recovering. As not, in a way, Burundi is the mirror state of Rwanda, and but it hasn't had the takeoff. So the fact that it's still in a post-conflict phase that is very. Uganda is approaching the end of an era with President Museveni's been there for the quarter of a century. I have no reason to believe he's going tomorrow, but there's certainly been tensions there. So the neighborhood itself is a challenge to Rwanda, which is why I think Rwanda is seeking and should seek regional integration. But that only can take you so far. So in many respects, you become, unfortunately, a passive actor to your neighbors' problems. And so I think that's going to be a long and ongoing, irrespective of what happens internally. It's going to be a geopolitical challenge going down the road.
Hi, my name is Fina Lee, and I'm a grad student in Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. So thank you for the presentation, and I have two questions. The first is, what's happening in Rwanda basically is to wait for a good social economic condition in order to raise a middle class. So it's kind of a good start is a good start, but I'm more interested in the micro level, which is the social rebuilding. I have a question, just like what's happening there, and what the government has been doing in terms of recast the social identity in order to combine different groups, after the genocide, because the wound is still fresh. It's hard to work with someone who killed my brother there, or just how to heal the social memory. That is the first question. And my second question is, I'm a Chinese. Chinese government is right now doing a lot of programs, quote unquote, with African country. So is there any Chinese present there, and what do you think of that? Is kind of what do you think of the role Chinese play? Not necessarily government, but economic or other social capacity building. Thank you.
It's two great questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, and goes into it now. Social rebuilding and healing of social memory. That's a very good and challenging question, and the context is also challenging. But I think after the commission of the genocide, you agree with me that Rwanda is such a special case where even after a genocide, identity-based genocide, the thinking and the philosophy of the national reconstruction has been based on that conviction that there is one Rwanda that is indivisible, that has to remain one, which implied that reconciliation, unity and reconciliation is a core foundation philosophically, in practice, and in thinking of the reconstruction of post-genocide Rwanda. If you look at what happened elsewhere, it is only in the 60s that Germany would start talking with Poland. Over 20 years. But in Rwanda, we started talking about reconciliation even before the genocide ended, because people were aware that without reconciliation and unity, there is no Rwanda, there is no way you can have this nation again. So that's why probably where the misunderstanding between us and the outside world sometimes comes. While we thought that we as Rwandans, the Rwandanness as a founding strategy for reconstruction became extremely core, some external actors thought that we should go Hutu and Tutsi. And yet we know that that is what they call deadly identities. And if we go that way, probably we want to have that reconstruction successful. It is tough, it is challenging, it is not a paradise. You understand, we have people who have, as you have put it well, people have killed the neighbors, but that was the only option to go. Despite the challenges, that's where we are headed to. So if in terms of public policing, that is the mother policy. Other policies become like secondary ones. If you are in disagreement with that one, then you will face the government reaction because you are hitting the heart of the nation. So if you are hitting reconstruction, you are hitting national unity, we can't move together. We can't have a society back again. So that's why sometimes people say, why don't you go Hutu stuff? But if you go that way, we know where you have come. We have tried to have those in our public policing, and we know where we reached. We got genocide because of those. It didn't help. So Now, all the efforts in terms of social healing, but also it is about it is not a top-down. There are also a lot of initiatives within the communities to make sure that people, it is not about government pushing citizens and society to reconcile. It is also about the society owning that, getting that ownership of being involved in socio-economic transformation through reconciliation, and it's working. In our assessment, and we see there is a lot of progress. I have seen the Gacaca process. I'm sure you have followed. If you look at the challenges we had, so after 1994, some people are saying, forget about justice, if you go reconciliation. But we tried to marry the two, peace and justice and reconciliation. So that's why that traditional justice has helped a lot in terms of not only bringing in justice, but also a reconciliatory mechanism of justice, because we knew that if we fail to do that, justice alone can't help. But forgetting also justice would not be helpful. So where we are now is by far improved compared to where we were 10 years ago. But have we achieved everything in terms of reconciliation and unity? No. Have we reached where we want to be to make sure that we say we have history behind us? For sure, we have history behind us, but are we safe from any challenges arising from that historical perspective? We still have those challenges. And I think that is what, to cut the long story short, is that we need not only to be consistent and continue our focus on national unity and reconciliation policies, and make sure that in what you call social memory, make sure that the Rwandanness as a founding identity keeps on going, and we keep emphasizing on it. Because if we fail on that, unfortunately, we might fail on other reconstruction programming. China, I think I will leave that a question, but what I can say is that there is that debate, why China in Africa, but nobody asks why Europe in Africa, why America in Africa. So Africa is open, and I think that is the American lesson. Be open to the world, open yourself to the east, open to the west, open to the north. And Africa is a land of opportunity and friendship. If today China comes, tomorrow Australia come, after tomorrow you have whatever Indians, so be it. We don't want to be selective in terms of opening our arms and our friendship to external world. We understand, and we have appreciate good friendship. Actually, it's amazing because China's investment in Europe are over 2 times bigger than China's investment in Africa. So how come now Europeans are saying why China is coming to Africa when there are more in Europe than in Africa? So it's a little bit a contradiction. So, but what we could say, we look forward to have more Chinese coming to Africa, and 10 times more Americans coming to us to do business, 30 times Europeans or whatever. But I don't understand why we should be saying China don't come to us, when no, it's a little bit of unfair game and play. But what we hope to see is that the American coming, Chinese coming, European coming contributes to what we are looking to see: socio-economic transformation, economic growth of Africans, development, infrastructure. If that can come through Chinese or Indians or Americans, so be it. We are very looking forward to more investment from China, as we do the same from other partners like US and Europe.
I would just pick up from what Professor Shyaka said about Africa's open for business. I think the historical moment is Africa's. The opportunity is there. The world needs the resources that are available in Africa, not just the primary resources, but the human resources. We're looking at a demographic trend which will make by the mid-century 1 in 4 workers in the world will be an African. So the world is coming to Africa. The question is whether African leaders, and this goes to the question of governance, African leaders are prepared to make the decisions which are in the long-term best interests and strategic interests of their country, or are some leaders going to simply pick the path of least resistance or short-term gain over long-term gain? If Africa ends up being a depot that simply exports its primary commodities for finishing elsewhere and doesn't do the value added in Africa, then by mid-century, there'll be 1 in 4 workers, but there'll be unemployed workers, and the resources will have gone, and that would have been a tragedy. So I would therefore not single out China. I would simply say that I think Secretary Clinton made a very good point at the beginning of her current trip to Africa in her speech in Senegal, where she invited African leaders to consider very carefully the development models they follow and to base their decisions on sustainable, long-term interests of their country. And I think that's really all we can fairly ask.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Not a question, just Germans have already been in Namibia, and the French-speaking countries, the Europeans have already been in Africa. For as long as I can remember, I'm only 63, but for as long as I can remember, the Europeans have already been in Africa, and I'm unaware if the Chinese have established political ties and or businesses in any of Africa.
Actually, right now, it's... okay, Chinese investment right now is everywhere. Basically, it's taking... Nigeria, for example. So it's like 3% of GDP goes to China's infrastructure, basic infrastructure. So it's China's basic investment in basic infrastructure is covering Africa, and we are doing resources business. And it's, in Afghanistan too. The only state-sponsored company in Afghanistan is Chinese. So that's what's threatening the West, because we are taking over resources. China is so far the second, consumer of the oil and the steel. So that's where the question comes from. Right. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Okay, my name is Giancarlo Cavallo, a recent graduate of Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs. I'm just wondering, in terms of recent aid drawbacks or pullouts, particularly from the U.S. and some other Western nations, to whatever extent they've been symbolic or actually having a significant impact on Rwanda, what Rwanda does. What is the outlook and what's the sort of strategy or response going forward? To what extent will they have an effect on either governance or the particular issues of policies in the Congo that they've been meant to address?
If we could just take the last question, and then if you could just address the two.
Erika Weberita, IRI. I was wondering if you could comment about how people feel about so many women elected into parliament in Rwanda, because Rwanda has been commended for that in the international community. And do you see the impact of women elected into the national government, to the national parliament, in terms of more women being elected locally? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and appreciate. Maybe I start by the last one, and I continue with so the feeling of women elected. I think it has been a huge empowerment, and it has become a huge inspiration. I'm now going actually even within and beyond. If you go to the region, Rwanda's experience in terms of gender equality and women's promotion has become now a clear inspiration for African and regional leaders. So a number of countries have taken the steps of at least establishing 30% of women in their parliaments, in their representation. When it comes to Rwanda, actually the empowerment goes beyond political dynamics. If you go into business, now it has become established that women are more and more active to make sure that they have that financial autonomy, they have that financial empowerment, but also the political impact is that women are coming now even at local level, at all the levels where decisions are being taken. You see the women coming up and taking more advantage of the policies which are friendly to their participation. It has created also a lot of pride in terms of pride not only for women but even for men. So, and some women say, if we women we have been able to do what we are doing and we have been integrated in the policy framework and political establishment, it's because our brothers, the men of Rwanda, have been actually more than supporting. And it has some cultural references, despite what people talk about Africa, but I think even traditionally, women in the Rwanda's traditional stuff had that connotation of being important. After the king, you had the mother, and I think that one is also there. So for sure, the feeling is high. The impact is extremely huge. So the impact has ceased to be only political, but it has embraced social arena. But now it is going into the corporate and business wise. So you can see the development has been a number of transformations have followed, because it is not enough to open up the political arena, but it was very important. For instance, if I give you 1-2 cases, inheritance. So in our past, only boys would inherit from their parents the property. So equality in property, inheritance has been established. Second, land issues. Women would not inherit from their parents, but even in a marriage, the equality on property was not yet established. But as of now, if you marry a woman and you have a house like this, and then 2 weeks later you want to divorce, you make sure that 50% of it goes. So that one is established. I'm not putting forward a divorce, but the issue of property has really been taken very seriously, and women are extremely empowered. The aid pullout and the impact of what is going on Rwanda, is there any plan B, etc., etc. So I will maybe I will elaborate on that. I'm speaking from the analytical point of view, and I'm not the spokesperson of the government on those issues. But frankly speaking, if you allow me to go back a bit, how and what we remember, and sometimes in my language they say that you remember a friend in difficult times. So we've had a number of difficult times. What we remember, in 1994, there was one country, after the commission of genocide, which trusted that the RPF, anti-genocide forces, were the hope for Rwanda. And that country launched an operation called Support Hope Operation. That country was America. So 1994, July, Support Hope Operation, that was America. In August the same year, when Rwanda had not even a single coin in the National Bank, zero. When we wanted to have a loan with the IMF and the Bretton Woods, they requested us to pay, I think, $800,000. But we didn't even have $2 in our whatever. So we were not able. There was one country which said, I will pay that for Rwanda so that Rwanda can access aid and debt and whatever. And that country was America. So for Rwandese, I can go on and go on. We can say, when you look at the partners we have and countries with some direct or indirect role in genocide, there is a country with less involvement in the commission of genocide, but which was among the first one to say, we are sorry, under Clinton. That country was America. They were not, the American role in that genocide, at least in the direct commission of genocide, there was none, almost none. But because of the indirect implications of the decision taken, America wasn't shy, said, we are sorry. and we want to support the reconstruction of this country. So, and I think that is, if you want me to speak from the bottom of my heart, in the Rwanda, the people of Rwanda I know, that is the most important thing beyond the money, whatever budget America can provide. So the consciousness that there is a country out there we can trust, we believe in, we think that country is genuine vis-a-vis what we are doing and vis-a-vis our reconstruction, that is much more powerful than any money you can provide. So Rwanda-America relations, from my analytical point of view, I think what matters from our perspective is money. What matters is about the trust we have constructed, the trust and the consistency America has been showing to us in terms of wishing us well, being next to us to help our development. Never mind when they stopped MCC and when they, whatever other program they will stop. Never mind, we don't have any problem. So and we have had a number of those experiences. But that said, for sure we need that money for our reconstruction processes. But Rwanda is a land, is a country that is used, we are no longer used to intellectual laziness. Is that how they call it? Despite challenges we can have, we say there is also always a way to get out of it. So whether they stop, they have stopped in 2008, they have stopped in 2003 when we are getting out of our transition or whatever. So stopping financial support does not stop us to continue seeing people as our partners. I think that is the foundation. It's not because UK, Netherlands, they are saying we might stop, or even US. Fine, that's your money, your taxpayers, you can stop. We will continue to look into our own poor ways. With that money, we can do great things. But without that money, we can find ways of doing small things. And we keep moving forward. But one thing I want to, before I conclude on this, and probably we can challenge our minds and our thinking and our political establishment. Rwanda is being praised as worldwide best experience in terms of effective use of aid. That's the Busan Worldwide Conference of just this year. That Rwanda is the best case where with $1 given in aid, you have the highest level of effectiveness in its use and in producing a greater impact, which implies that the money you are giving us were used to the purpose for which you gave that money. If you give for agriculture, it goes to agriculture. If you give for education, it goes for education. So the question, where myself I get confused, is how now you state relating it to something that is completely not even substantiated sufficiently, because all the evidence that were produced have found to be not only relevant, actually present a lot of deficit in terms of analysis, in terms of understanding, in terms of arguments. How does it happen that based on something that is an addendum to a draft report, you take such far-reaching decisions? But we forget, very quickly we forget that when we say the most important is the trust we can have, the most important that we can have a partnership relationship not based on money and your financial support, but moving forward, and we are very sure that we'll find a way of getting out. One of the mechanisms we use, as we have used in the justice sector, you remember 15, 17 years ago, after the commission of genocide, we had 100,000 prisoners of genocide in jail. All the international systems, national systems collapsed vis-a-vis that huge number of prisoners. We didn't know how to deal with it until we found Uga Church and we said, let's go this unconventional way. So someone, I think it's Dr. Peter, who talked about the personalization and Kagame and President Kagame and his role in whatever governance and the sustainability. I think there is something that we've got, the homegrown solutions as the effective venues or avenues for us to move forward, whether it is justice, whether it is development, whether it is socio-economic transformation. Now we have embraced that programmatic approach, homegrown solutions across sectors, private sector, education. Rwanda is among the very few African, where we have reached almost the universal education, thanks to the homegrown approach of 9 years basic education. Go to health sector, very same. I think we've got, that's maybe the one domain where Rwanda can say we are better than America. We have highest health coverage than you do. We have 98%. So we can sell our strategy to you. So if you wish, but the most important thing I think that we have discovered that through homegrown solutions, you can quickly, effectively achieve a lot. And when it comes to the personalization you've said, I can even say that. And I think it was President Obama who said at some point that Africa needs strong institutions, not strong leaders or something like that. But I think, and I don't want to contradict your president being here a guest, but I think we all need strong leaders. But with strong institutions, I don't think America can afford to have a weak leader because we have strong institutions. We aspire, all of us, Americans and Rwandese, we aspire to strong institutions, but also to strong leaders. So if you refer to Kagame, I think there is one thing we can say. Yes, we can refer to President Kagame as a strong leader, but what is probably not referred to sufficiently that his legacy already, he's still around, but probably Kagame's legacy is stronger than he is. So I don't know if that one is, he has left a legacy in terms of confidence in what we are doing, in terms of finding solutions from our own perspectives, in terms of not crying every time and running and saying we are dead. Resilience. I think the legacy has left, the imprint of the legacy, although he is still around, is stronger than he is. So I wouldn't be wondering, is what Rwanda is doing going to be sustainable? Because his legacy, the legacy of the president, is actually stronger than he is. I'm absolutely confident that that sustainability is not a function only on him. It has become a collective program and project that Rwanda is us, that this leadership has to sustain, that this vision has to continue, and we have to get there. I think that is what we term as national resilience.
Well, thank you very much. I think that the one fact that we can take away from today's discussion, I'm sure we could talk more and more, is, Rwanda is a very small country, but its importance goes way beyond its borders, and its impact goes way beyond its borders, and the international attention continues to focus on Rwanda and what it's doing. So we appreciate you coming and talking. I know there's some tough questions out there, but thank you for taking them. And Peter, thank you very much for your comments, as always. And thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you.